finding its way back in time to improve your grade. Unless the laws of physics had suddenly been repealed, time is supposed to run in only one direction. Causes are supposed to come before, not after, their effects. But with the publication of Bem's paper, these bizarre results were now a part of the scientific literature. Crucially, Bem's experiments were extremely simple, requiring nothing more complicated than a desktop computer. If Bem was right, any researcher could produce evidence for the paranormal just by following his experimental instructions, even a PhD student with next to no resources. That is what I was, so that is exactly what I did. I got in touch with two other psychologists who were also skeptical of the results, Richard Wiseman of the University of Hertfordshire and Chris French of Goldsmiths, University of London. We agreed to rerun Bem's word list experiment 3 times, once at each of our respective universities. After a few weeks of recruiting participants, waiting for them to complete the memory test, and then dealing with their looks of bewilderment as we explained afterwards what we'd been looking for, we had the results. They showed nothing. Our undergraduates weren't psychic. There was no difference in their recall of the words presented after the test. Perhaps the laws of physics were safe after all. We duly wrote up our results and sent the resulting paper off to the same scientific journal that had published Bem's study, the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. Almost immediately, the door was slammed in our faces. The editor rejected the paper within a few days, explaining to us that they had a policy of never publishing studies that repeated a previous experiment, whether or not those studies found the same results as the original. Were we wrong to feel aggrieved? The journal had published a paper that had made some extremely bold claims. Claims that, if true, weren't just interesting to psychologists, but would completely revolutionize science. The results had made their way into the public domain and received significant publicity in the popular media, including an appearance by Bem on the late-night talk show The Colbert Report, where the hosts coined the memorable phrase, time-traveling porn. Yet the editors wouldn't even consider publishing a replication study that called the findings into question. Meanwhile, another case was unfolding that also raised alarming questions about the current state of scientific practice. Science, widely considered one of the world's most prestigious scientific journals, second only to Nature, had published a paper by Diederik Stapel, a social psychologist at Tilburg University in the Netherlands. The paper, entitled Coping with Chaos, described several studies performed in the lab and on the street, finding that people showed more prejudice and endorsed more racial stereotypes when in a messier or dirtier environment. This, and some of Stapel's dozens of other papers, hit the headlines across the world. Chaos promotes stereotyping, wrote Nature's news service. Where there's rubbish, there's racism, alliterated the Sydney Morning Herald. The results exemplified a type of social psychology research that produced easy-to-grasp findings with, as Stapel himself wrote, clear policy implications. In this case, to diagnose environmental disorder early and intervene immediately. The problem was that none of it was real. Some of Stapel's colleagues became suspicious after they noticed the results of his experiments were a little too perfect. Not only that, but whereas senior academics are normally extremely busy and rely on their students to do such menial tasks as collecting data, Stapel had apparently gone out and collected all the data himself. After the colleagues brought these concerns to the university in September 2011, Stapel was suspended from his professorship. Multiple investigations followed. In a confessional autobiography he wrote subsequently, Stapel admitted that instead of collecting the data for his studies, he would sit alone in his office or at his kitchen table late into the night, typing the numbers he required for his imaginary results into a spreadsheet, making them all up from scratch. I did some things that were terrible, maybe even disgusting, he wrote. I faked research data and invented studies that had never happened. I worked alone, knowing exactly what I was doing. I didn't feel anything, no disgust, no shame, no regrets. His scientific fraud was surprisingly elaborate. I invented entire schools where I'd done my research. Teachers